Great.
Everybody give a warm welcome to Mary Beard.
Hi. Welcome to you all.
So if you want to be seen by Mary and recorded, you can come here. If you want to be heard by Mary and recorded, but not seen, you could just kind of hang out over here. Does that make sense, everybody? Perfect. Okay, this is Omar.
Hello, Omar.
So I understand that you are a strong advocate for returning the Parthenon marbles to Athens. Many Egyptians have had their artifacts stolen over the years. And I was wondering if you would also be an advocate for the return of their artifacts, such as the Rosetta Stone.
Well, that's an uncontroversial question to start with, isn't it?
Well, maybe.
Look, I'm not a strong advocate for anything either way right now. I mean, I'm not pro and I'm not anti. But let me put it this way. What I try to do, insofar as I've got a stake in this, is to say, look, we really have now to, we have to think first what we think museums are for, what we think ownership of objects is all about, what we think cultural property is, and where and how it should be seen. Now, that seems a very general set of questions, but I think that it's a question of, really thinking forward to the 21st century, not looking back to the 19th, right? And there was in our newspapers here today, there was a very good article by Charlotte Higgins in The Guardian, which you can get online. And she says what I think, actually, which is that there's a tendency for museums, even the most liberal ones, to think of returning objects as somehow a kind of threat or a danger or, a negative. And she was saying, look, why don't we turn this on its head? And I think that some people have been saying this around issues in the British Museum. Let's think about new questions about who owns these things and the possibilities of restitution. Let's think of that as a kind of cultural possibility. Let's think of that as a potential advantage, not a disadvantage. Let's kind of reset the agenda here. And can we use some of those big objects? And that might include some of the Egyptian things in rethinking the very nature of the museum. And so I have a kind of sort of overarching view in which then I think you can find a framework for talking about the individual objects. And I do think it's complicated because I think that, I see and understand and sympathise with people's claims to many different objects that are in American museums or UK museums or whatever. I also don't want to have a world. I don't want a world in which the only place you can see Greek objects is in Greece, British objects is in Britain, Egyptian objects is in Egypt. I enjoy a world in which London is a global city and you can see global objects. That said, with some of these, we're in a kind of position, I think, where we've reached an impasse. We've got to be able to do better. So I'm very, very keen on helping us do better, right? And helping us not just have a kind of sort of tug of love divorce case about who's going to have this object. But also think about what we could most productively do with it. Where do we really feel happy that it belongs? How do we come to an agreement and compromises? And in the course of that, I have no doubt that some objects will move around, and I think they should. So, I have a kind of very academic overview of this, but I think that things are moving, and I think that they're moving in the right direction. And if I can play a bit of a part in that, I'm very pleased to.
Thank you, Mary Beard.
Wow, Mary, thank you so much for that. Next question. Who would like to be seen? Be heard?
Hello, Ilana. Hello.
So as an infamous classicist who does utilize modern media, how do you see classics affecting modern times? And what do you hope is the biggest takeaway that you hope resonates with students from your production?
That's really hard. Again, these questions are really good ones because they're hard ones. I think that the first thing I'd say is that I don't think that classics has got answers to our problems. I don't think that, you can look at what's happening in the States or the UK, go back to Rome and find an answer there for what we should do. I don't think it's not like that. It's not a kind of a row of ready-made solutions that we can borrow. I think what it does is two things for me. In part, it makes us look differently at ourselves. I think that studying two very old civilizations which have left a whole load of evidence behind them, so we can really get into them. I think it opens up completely different ways of thinking about our assumptions, what we take as natural. I tend to think, well, what would the Romans make of us? What would the Romans think very odd about us? They give us a kind of way of externalizing ourselves. The Romans would be amazed to come and find we got so many people locked up in prison, right? Absolutely amazed. I mean, they didn't have prisons, really. We have totally internalized incarceration as a way of dealing with culture, with dissident culture. I think that, I should say, I don't think that the Greeks and Romans are, any better than any other culture. I don't think that they are uniquely privileged and uniquely good and uniquely brilliant. I don't think that. We just happen to have a lot of them. We happen to be able to access them, right? And so I wouldn't make great claims for the quality or the virtue of Greece and Rome. I don't think we can make those claims. It just, for all kinds of reasons, we happen to know a lot about them, and we know a lot more about them than, for example, what we know about the British in 100 CE, right? So, we can explore them, and that's not because they were better. It's the accidents of history. I think that also, I'm very, very, very unkeen on the idea, as you'll have guessed from what I've just said, of kind of the brilliance of Western civilization in inverted commas. I think it's one civilization among many, and as soon as it should not be put on a pedestal in the way that it has been quite often. I nevertheless think that it does, studying Greece and Rome does help us in the West understand some of the assumptions that we've got, and I think that take Virgil. I think it would be, I couldn't prove this, but I think it's a reasonable guess to say that every day since Virgil almost finished writing the Aeneid, every day over the last 2,000 years, somebody somewhere has been reading the Aeneid. They have been. They've mostly been boys, actually, until recently, but somebody, so in a way, it helps you kind of get into the kind of cultural assumptions we have about empire and freedom through all those ways, not only that where we're looking at how the Romans or the Greeks wrote about themselves or thought about themselves, but how everybody since has had to go in engaging with that and thinking about it and criticizing it. And so I think it's a wonderful way of helping us think about ourselves better. Now, I just read a book that's just come out by Shadi Barch called Plato Goes to China. And I think in that book, she just demonstrates how, in this case, thinking about different Chinese appropriations and interpretations of Plato from the kind of what we think of as the canonical Western interpretations, how that helps you get into a debate about different forms of culture, politics, cultural leadership, or whatever. So I think it's about us and about how we read and learning to read. And there's wonderful things to read, but there's wonderful things to read from everywhere. It's not. So I think that that I would be very sad. I think Tacitus is the greatest critique of empire there's ever been. But there's quite a few others. But it's the way our engagement has changed, and the way it shows us a way of being different and a way of being the same. So that's a bit solid.
Thank you, Mary. How are you holding up?
I'm holding up fine. These are such good questions, so I hope I'm doing them justice. Hello. Who are you?
I'm Owen. Yeah. So my question was, so I know that Boris Johnson had an education in classics and became a mayor, but how do you believe that the research that you and others do on Roman culture and just ancient archaeology in general works to the benefits of today's society or just societies in general?
Boris Johnson's a problem for me.
I did reassure him. I did reassure them that at the time you debated Boris, he was just mayor at the time, and
he was just mayor. And to be fair to him, it was a charity gig in aid of a charity called Classics for All, which is trying to put classics back into state schools, what you'd call public schools in the UK. And I was very, very, very.
Principal of our school came in to see how the talk was going, and I was like, "You want to come and ask questions?" But he said no.
I know.